we can see that she still has her stock grant letter open, we saw at the beginning of this demo. And now we're going to actually run some attacks within the environment. So we're now directly inside her environment. So now what we're going to do is we're going to run a command that we had uploaded with mmap. So we're going to cd into the mmap directory, and we're going to run sharphound. What sharphound does is it enumerates the Active Directory environment and looks for relationships that could potentially be leveraged or vulnerable to access permissions that we shouldn't have access to. So it can map if there are any strange trust relationships. So if a system is trusted one way, that people don't know that that credential shouldn't have that trust enabled, we would be able to see that when we graph this data. So this is just an attack upon an Active Directory environment, and we will see, look into that just a little bit further. But next, we're going to go ahead and remote desktop into that nice SQL server called Gibson. So we have our username, we have our password. When we try to log in, we get a two-factor authentication screen, and now the adversary is stopped from accessing that Gibson server. So essentially what had happened was it had popped up on Margot Wallace's phone a two-factor authentication saying, did you really try to access this server? And she can just hit deny, and it'll say, was this a suspicious login? Say yes, and that can get escalated to the security team. But that adversary does not have access, does not have the capability to leverage her credentials to gain access to the SQL server. So let's take a look at what happened on the back end, what CrowdStrike saw. So here we can see the incident with Margot Wallace, and first we see a suspicious LDAP activity. So what it saw was the enumeration of the Active Directory environment. You know, somebody had tried to read all the Active Directory information, put that together. We identified that as being potentially malicious, and we identified that and notified the CrowdStrike administrator. Second, we see the identity verification denied. That's the two-factor authentication where she said denied. I did not try to log into this server that I generally do not log into. All right, so let's take a look to see some of the intelligence that goes behind denying that type of login. So we're going to take a look at Margot Wallace's account. We can see her risk rating. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second, but we're just going to take a look at her endpoints right now. So we click on endpoints, and we can see a single endpoint. This is her workstation that we logged in at the beginning of the day. Remember when we logged in at the beginning of the day? There was no two-factor authentication. She could just log in, no problem. That's because CrowdStrike had used machine learning to automatically assign Margot Wallace to that system. So it knows that she can log into that system. It had created a baseline. It won't put anything in the way of her logging into that. You know, that would prevent like two-factor authentication fatigue, you know, where it keeps just popping up. Users get frustrated, they get angry at the system. But what we don't see here is that Gibson system. So Gibson was not automatically assigned to her user. So when she tried to log into Gibson, it had gone ahead and required two-factor authentication. Obviously, we could just block those connections outright. We can make sure that she doesn't log into a system that she shouldn't have access to. And again, this is all done automatically. You know, it's using a baseline to determine what systems she should log into versus, you know, having to manually assign users to computers. All right, so now let's take a look at the other system that's part of this incident. It's when she tried to log into that Gibson system. So I'm going to go ahead and look at the details of that system. And we can see a risk rating for that Gibson system. It's got 9.2. So essentially that means that it has potentially sensitive information on that system. So we want to make sure that it's restricted access. You know, not everybody can access that system. Just to kind of dig a little bit deeper into that system, let's take a look at the login activity for that system, the login history. And sure, we see some admin logins. That's fine, right? That's typical. But we also see this strange male underscore SBC system or account that has logged into that system. And probably a lot of you know that the SBC stands for a service account, and obviously a service account shouldn't be using RDP to log into any other systems. You know, a service account should generally be just used for system-to-system type logins. So let's go ahead and investigate that just a little bit more. So when we take a look at the mail service, sure enough, it's a programmatic account, type of account. That programmatic attribute is assigned to that automatically. So CrowdStrike has identified that this is a service account and has automatically classified it as programmatic. So when we see that start to log into other systems, we can go ahead and apply rules to that or policies to that to prevent it from doing something malicious. So let's go ahead and create a new rule that takes a look at programmatic accounts and login types. So we're going to take a look at the policy, and we're going to go ahead and create a new rule, and we're going to say that we're going to block any RDP session with service accounts. And here we can see a bunch of different templates that's available out of the box. So we can just select one of these right away. For instance, an anonymous log authentication. That's that rule that we saw earlier where it had gone ahead and required two-factor authentication when Margot Wallace tried to log into a system that she doesn't frequently log into. So that rule is available just out of the box. You could have just blocked her, required two-factor authentication. But what we're going to do here is we're going to choose this restrict RDP rule. And when we select the restrict RDP rule, it will automatically have the rules pre-populated, and we can also add additional conditions to further narrow the scope of the protection for that user account. So we can use either deterministic type conditions, such as using baselines, you know, if the user logs into the system or not, if it has a high risk profile or not, or we can just use static attributes, you know, if it's part of this OU, go ahead and let these users log into that system. We're just gonna keep it simple for now. We just created a new rule that will block service accounts that are automatically identified by CrowdStrike from logging into systems that they should have access to, you know, essentially should RDP into any system with an RDP rule. I just want to mention something else about identity protection. You know, many of you are probably familiar with the MITRE attack evaluations. Recently they've done an evaluation to see how CrowdStrike or multiple vendors protect against the APT 29. And it turns out that with identity protection enabled, MITRE wasn't even able to initiate their attack on the system. They had required us to disable identity protection completely before they can even begin the evaluation. So that's, you know, we're the only vendor that was able to achieve that type of protection. And then if they actually disabled identity protection, we were still able to block 100% of their attacks. You know, but again, you know, we have a defense in depth where, you know, with identity, it just stops cold in most attacks. On it. Finally, you might be asking yourself, so why did we just, you know, why couldn't we just block it in the first place? You know, we have Word document executed in PowerShell, right? Well, it turns out that we actually could have blocked it right there. You know, it would have made a very interesting identity demo if we would have just blocked it at step one. But we saw all the missions that that system was doing, and we could have blocked it at all these locations, again, to show the power of identity protection. We wanted just to let it play out, you know, just let it play out, and then we could block it, you know, that lateral movement. You know, and also credentials can be compromised by other mechanisms. You know, a credential doesn't need to be compromised by somebody, you know, doing a phishing attack. You know, if somebody just uses the same password for, let's say, Facebook and, you know, their corporate account, there's a data breach of Facebook. Now that malicious actor potentially has pro credentials to your corporate network. All right, great. So that's kind of all I got. Back to you, Jared.
All right. Yeah, let me remind everybody how to get your own Cozy Bear action figure. You've already done one of the